Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, November 5th, 2025. The Supreme Court hears a case brought by business owners challenging whether President Donald Trump has the power to declare national emergencies to implement global tariffs. Most news articles writing about the case suggesting the answer from the justices will be no. We'll hear some of the oral argument and talk with the Hill's legal affairs reporter Zach Schonfeld. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy announces a 10% reduction in scheduled airline flight capacity at the nation's top 40 high-traffic markets due to the federal government shutdown, now at a record day 36, and the strain on air traffic controllers not being paid, although required to work. President Trump meets with Senate Republicans and again calls for the Senate filibuster rule to be abolished so that Republicans can reopen the government and pass other legislation with a simple majority vote instead of the 60 votes needed that would bypass the objections and demands of Democrats. President and party leaders react to the sweeping election night victories by Democrats in the races for Virginia and New Jersey governors, New York City mayor, and in California, that congressional redistricting ballot initiative. And Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, Intelligence Committee Vice Chair, speaks to reporters after a closed-door briefing by the Secretaries of Defense and State on the Trump administration's military strikes on suspected drug trafficking boats off the coast of Venezuela. The Hill's legal affairs reporter Zach Schonfeld writes President Trump's tariffs were met with reservations from the Supreme Court as his administration faced incisive questioning Wednesday over its use of emergency powers to justify his sweeping economic agenda. Joining us now on the phone is Zach Schonfeld. Thanks for being with us. The headline of your article uses the word frosty. I've seen other reporters say skeptical. Sounds like you and they believe the tariffs might be struck down.
That's right. Whatever word you want to use, I think you would rather be the challengers right now than the Trump administration. And that's based on nearly 3 hours of questioning today that the 9 justices gave to both the administration and then different groups of challengers who are challenging these tariffs, a group of small businesses and then also Democratic-led states. It wasn't just the 3 liberal justices in the minority posing sharp questions to the Trump administration today, but we also saw some skepticism from members of the Supreme Court's 6-3 conservative majority, particularly justices like Chief Justice John Roberts, and then also 2 of Donald Trump's own appointees, Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch, all at different points expressing concerns about parts of the administration's position that it can point to an emergency power law that Congress passed back in the 1970s to justify these sweeping tariffs.
What were the legal questions that these justices were asking about?
This case really does boil down to that 1970s law. It's a law called IEPA, and it was passed and it set out new rules for the president's emergency authority. And at its core, it gives the president authority to regulate imports in response to certain national emergencies. So the challengers here have several different arguments. The first argument they make is that this law, it says regulate imports, and that Congress never intended for that to ever mean tariffs. So they say that is enough to strike down the tariffs. If the Supreme Court disagrees, the challenger's next argument is that IEPA's text, it requires these tariffs or any other remedy that the president is doing to be in response to national emergencies that pose an unusual and extraordinary threat. The president has cited emergencies over fentanyl and trade deficits to impose these tariffs, and the challengers argue that neither of those are valid emergencies, saying that they are not unusual and extraordinary. They have some other arguments too, but those are the 2 core arguments that come right out of the text of that 1970s law.
The U.S. Solicitor General John Sauer arguing for the administration. He's saying that, in fact, you can impose tariffs and to regulate.
That's right. He says that regulate imports language always meant tariffs. In fact, he points specifically actually back to the Nixon administration, back before this law was passed. So this law was passed in 1977. But a few years before that, to turn the clock back to 1971, President Nixon imposed a temporary 10% tariff on countries all across the globe. Now, the statute wasn't passed yet, but instead, at the time, Nixon actually had pointed to the statute's predecessor that was on the books. And Congress, when they passed this law, carried over that same language. And so the argument from the Trump administration is Congress knew when it passed this law in 1977 that regulate imports would have meant tariffs. So the argument from the Trump administration today is that this fits very neatly into the statute.
We're talking with Zach Schonfeld from The Hill. The question of determining what is a national emergency, was that an issue at all?
Well, it was an issue and all, but I will say we didn't see the Supreme Court really get into the nitty-gritty of questioning the specifics of these emergencies that Trump has cited over fentanyl and trade deficits. Now, the Trump administration, they have made the argument that judges have no business second-guessing the president's emergency findings. They have essentially said the fact that Trump declared these emergencies and found that they were unusual and extraordinary threats, that the Supreme Court and these lower courts that struck down the tariffs have no business getting involved here. But it really does remain to be seen exactly what the Supreme Court thinks about the specifics of these emergencies, because really much of the argument today focused, on that language in the statute, that regulate imports language. And like I said, not getting too much into drug trafficking and trade deficits that on paper is the rationale for why the Trump administration has been imposing these tariffs.
I understand that the Trump administration wants a quick decision on this, and as the clock is ticking, tariffs are being collected. Also, if the authority were to be struck down, some of that tariff money would need to be refunded. I understand that did come up today.
That's right. The Trump administration has signaled that if they don't win here, that would perhaps be the next step here, is possibly that all of the tariff revenue that has been collected would have to be refunded. So that is why you see the Trump administration, they've really minced no words in describing the stakes here to the justices. They've essentially said a ruling against the administration would be nothing short of economic disaster. Now, you also asked about the timing of this decision. Of course, the Supreme Court, it hands down many of its big decisions in that common decision season of May and June, but this tariff case is being heard on an expedited schedule. So although at this point we don't know exactly when the justices are going to hand down this decision, the fact that they've agreed to hear this on an expedited calendar could suggest that we might get a ruling sooner rather than later. I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be tomorrow or anytime super soon, but it is perhaps a ruling that we could see in the next few months as opposed to waiting until next summer.
You were in the courthouse today, very high-profile case. Who else was there?
Yeah, no cameras allowed inside that courtroom, but it really inside was a who's who. Of course, the president had been signaling in the weeks leading up to today that he may actually attend the argument. He opted to not attend, instead went to Miami. But we did see two members of his cabinet in attendance, both Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and then Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. I caught Bessent as he was leaving the courtroom. I asked him how the argument went, and he gave me a thumbs up. But that wasn't all. First of all, we saw several lawmakers in attendance, including Senators Amy Klobuchar, Mike Lee, and Ed Markey was there, but also one pretty unexpected guest in the public gallery today, and that was comedian John Mulaney. We spotted him in one of the back rows, just listening to the arguments. We don't know exactly why he was there, although one lawyer after the argument did point out to me that he does have an existing relationship with one of the lawyers who was arguing today, so perhaps he was just going to see his friend argue this big case before the high court.
Zach Schonfeld, legal affairs reporter with The Hill. Find his articles at thehill.com and on X at Zach A. Schonfeld. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Washington Today, and now some of that oral argument in the Supreme Court consolidated cases, Learning Resources Incorporated v. Trump, President of the United States, and Trump, President of the United States, v. VOS Selections Incorporated. Justice Neil Gorsuch questioning U.S. Solicitor General John Sauer.
You say that we shouldn't be so concerned in the area of foreign affairs because of the president's inherent powers. That's the gist of it, as I understand it, why we should disregard both major questions and non-delegation. So could Congress delegate to the president the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations as he sees fit, to lay and collect duties as he sees fit?
We don't assert that here. That would be a much harder case now in 1790.
Isn't that the logic of your view, though?
I don't think so, because we're dealing with a statute that was a carefully crafted compromise. It does have all the limitations that I just talked about.
You're saying we shouldn't be concerned with. I want to explain to me how you draw the line, because you say we shouldn't be concerned because this is foreign affairs and the president has inherent authority, and so delegation off the books, more or less. And if that's true, what would prohibit Congress from just abdicating all responsibility to regulate foreign commerce, for that matter, declare war, to the president?
We don't contend that he could do that. If it did,
why not?
Well, because we're dealing with a statute, again, that has a whole.
I'm not asking about the statute, General. I'm not asking about the statute. I'm asking for your theory of the Constitution. and why the major questions and non-delegation, what bite it would have in that case.
Yes, I would say by then you would move from the area where there's enormous deference to the president, actually both the political branches, where here there's inherent authority, and piled on top of that there's a broad delegation.
You're saying there's inherent authority in foreign affairs, all foreign affairs. So regulate commerce, duties and tariffs and war. It's inherent authority all the way down, you say. Fine. Congress decides tomorrow, well, we're tired of this legislating business. We're just going to hand it all off to the president. What would stop Congress from doing that?
That would be different than a situation where there are metes and bounds, so to speak. It would be a wholesale application.
You say we are not here to judge metes and bounds when the foreign affairs. That's what I'm struggling with. You'd have to have some test. And if it isn't the intelligible principle test or something more with more bite than that, you're saying it's something less. Well, what is that less?
I think what the court has said in its opinions is just that it applies with much less force, more limited application in this context. So perhaps the right to approach it is a very, very deferential application of the intelligible principle test, that sort of wholesale application of.
All right, so now you're admitting that there is some non-delegation principle at play here, and therefore major questions as well. Is that right?
Very limited, very, very deferential. Okay. Limited is what, and again, the phrase that Justice Jackson uses, it just does not apply, at least.
I know, but that's where you started off, and now you've retreated from that, as I understand it.
Well, I think we would, as our frontline position, assert the stronger position, but if the court doesn't accept it, then if there is a highly deferential.
Can you give me a reason to accept it, though? That's what I'm struggling and waiting for. What's the reason to accept the notion that Congress can hand off the power to declare war to the president?
Well, we don't contend that. Again, that would
well, you do. You say it's unreviewable. There's no manageable standard, nothing to be done. And now you're, I think tell me if I'm wrong. You backed off that position.
Maybe that's fair to say.
Okay, all right.
That would be, I think, an abdication. That would really be an abdication, not a delegation.
I'm delighted to hear that, you know.
Okay. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch questioning U.S. Solicitor General John Sauer during today's oral argument in the case on the legality of President Trump's tariffs. One of the lawyers arguing the other side was the Oregon Solicitor General Benjamin Gutman, who got these questions from Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Ketanji Brown Jackson. New York Times in its live blog writing that at this point in the oral argument, we've reached the baked goods portion of the tariff hearing. At one point, Justice Kavanaugh asked why would Congress give the president the power to shut down trade, but not to take a less severe step like impose a 1% tariff. That, he said, appeared to underscore the government's claim, creating an odd donut hole in the statute. We pick it up from there.
Shut down trade. I mean, think about the effects, but you're admitting that power's in there.
Yeah.
But can't do a 1% tariff. That doesn't seem, but I want to get your answer, to have a lot of common sense behind it.
I think it absolutely does, because it's a fundamentally different power. It's not a donut hole. It's a different kind of pastry.
And on that power, that's a good one. On that power, though, and you've said this many times, and Mr. Katyal too, and look, I get this, obviously, but the court has repeatedly said a tariff on foreign imports is an exercise of the commerce power, not of the taxation power. And I'm repeating some, but John Marshall said that, and Joseph Story, and Chief Justice Hughes in the 1933 case. And we've said that quite a bit of time, which seems to at least undermine a bit your point that it's an entirely different power, because if it is foreign commerce power, it's the same power that Justice Barrett was talking about of just embargoing trade with the entire world, which you admit is in this statute.
Well, there are a couple of points in there, and I'll try to get to all of them, but I mean, I think all of us agree that context is what matters here, and that you certainly could use the word regulate to talk about a tariffing power, like you could use it to talk about a taxing power. I mean, we impose taxes for regulatory purposes as well. But the federal government hasn't identified a single other federal statute that uses the term regulate to authorize tariffs or taxes. That is just a different kind of power.
And I thought your point in response to Justice Kavanaugh, it's a different kind of power because the power that's being authorized by this statute is the power to control or freeze trade. That's what Congress was getting at. And so if that's true, then we have to read regulate in that context.
That's exactly right. And I think the reason, getting back to common sense as to why a legislature might authorize that, is that you might not fear abuse of that power in the same way that you would be concerned about abuse of a power to impose unlimited taxes with sort of no controlling.
Oregon Solicitor General Benjamin Gutmann questioned by Supreme Court Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Ketanji Brown Jackson in today's case about whether President Trump's global tariffs are legal under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. There was a third lawyer who also argued, Neil Katyal, for the small businesses that challenged the tariffs. It was over 2.5 hours of argument, covered live on the C-SPAN networks. You can find the video at cspan.org. President Donald Trump spoke about his tariff policy today at the America Business Forum in Miami.
And I'm pleased to report that today the United States has the strongest economy, the strongest borders, the strongest military, the strongest friendships, and the strongest spirit of any nation anywhere. We have the greatest economy right now. A lot of people don't see that. But if you look at what's happening with all the factories, AI, auto plants all over the country being built, that if you would have thought about that 2 or 3 years ago, you would have said it was the opposite. They were all leaving. Now they're all coming in. They're all coming back and then some. And I think that we can honestly say, and I think you're going to see it even more so over the next 12 months, that this is the golden age of America. This is the golden age. In the prior 4 years, crooked Joe Biden oversaw less than $1 trillion of new investment in the United States. So in 4 years, less than 1 trillion. That was not doing too good. In 9 months, I've secured commitments of over $18 trillion, and we're going to have 21 trillion within the first year. So Sleepy Joe think of that. In 4 years, he did less than $1 trillion. We're going to have 21 trillion in 1 year. I would say it's slightly better. Slightly, just a little bit better. The stock market has set 40-time all-time record highs, and just recently, record high, record high, record high. All of them, all of the different exchanges. GDP growth in the second quarter was an amazing, almost 4%. And as you know, they said, oh, it'll be 2% or 1%. And it's been really helped a lot by the tariffs. It's been really helped incredibly, because this is really a transition period. We went from a horrible, failed country to a tremendous success. It's a transition, and yet we did almost 4%.
President Donald Trump today at the America Business Forum in Miami, NBC Miami, writing about it, saying this is where global leaders, cultural figures, and innovators converge for a 2-day forum that brings together voices shaping business, entertainment, and technology on a worldwide scale, the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau states. And nearly 30,000 attendees are expected. Organizers describing the forum as a more accessible version of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, or the Milken Institute Global Conference, which gathers the world's elite for discussions on the economy. That was from NBC Miami. Back in Washington, D.C., outside the Supreme Court, after the oral argument in today's case that challenges President Trump's global tariffs, one of the plaintiffs, a small business owner, spoke to reporters.
I'm Victor Owen Schwartz, founder of VOS Selections. For nearly 40 years, my family has built this business from the ground up. Today, reckless tariffs threaten everything we've achieved. Let's be clear, these tariffs aren't paid by foreign governments or companies. It's American businesses like mine and American consumers that are footing the bill for the billions of dollars collected monthly by our government. Unlike past tariffs set by Congress that we could plan around, these new tariffs are arbitrary. They're unpredictable and they're bad for business. They've thrown my family business and thousands of others into chaos. The pain has been felt across the country, from warehouse workers and truckers to retailers and restaurateurs. That's why I joined this lawsuit. I was shocked that those with more power and money did not step up. The reason I was able to file this case is because the Liberty Justice Center did step up and offered 100% pro bono legal services to me and other affected small businesses. When I was given the chance to speak up for small American businesses, I took it. I had to. our very survival is at stake. I'm grateful to the Liberty Justice Center and our legal team for their vigorous advocacy, and I urge the court to recognize the real harm these tariffs inflict on American families and businesses. Thank you.
Victor Owen Schwartz, founder of EOS Selections, one of the plaintiffs that brought the lawsuit challenging whether President Trump acted lawfully in imposing global tariffs. Supreme Court heard the argument today. USA Today writing that Trump has said he will ask the Supreme Court for an expedited ruling, but it's unclear how quickly they will hand down a decision. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the longer a final ruling is delayed, the greater the risk of economic disruption. That was in a declaration to the court. He went on, for example, delaying a ruling until June 2026 could result in a scenario in which $750 billion to $1 trillion in tariffs have already been collected, and unwinding them could cause significant disruption. That was from USA Today. Wall Street today, the Dow up 225, Nasdaq up 151, S&P up 24. The head of a trade group representing major U.S. airlines told Reuters on Wednesday carriers are beginning to see a drop-off in passengers' bookings as a government shutdown hit a record 36th day on Wednesday. Chris Sununu, who heads the Airlines for America group that represents American, United, Southwest, Delta, and JetBlue and other major carriers, said we are seeing an industry pullback on folks booking their travel plans just over a week ago, and it's growing a little bit every day, reporting from Reuters. The Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy announced today that with air traffic controllers on the job and not being paid, there will be reductions in flights in major markets to ensure safety.
And what we're finding is that our air traffic controllers, because of the financial pressures at home, are taking side jobs. They need to put food on the table, gas in the car, pay their bills. By the way, I do not want them to take side jobs. I want them to show up for work. We have asked them to show up for work, but I'm not naive to understand that they're trying to figure out how they meet their daily obligations. And so because of that, we have seen staffing pressures throughout our airspace. Those who travel will see that we've had more delays. We've had more cancellations. We do not want to see disruptions at the FAA or here at DOT. We don't want that. But our number one priority is to make sure when you travel safely. And that's why, as the administrator and I have been talking throughout the day, his team has been working for the last 24, 36, 48 hours crunching data. We're noticing that there's additional pressure that's building in the system. And again, our priority is to make sure that you're safe. And so we're going to talk about additional measures that we are going to take that's going to reduce the risk profile in the national airspace. And I'm going to turn it over to the administrator to do that as he walks through what that plan is going to look like. I anticipate there will be additional disruptions. There will be frustration. We are working with the airlines. They're going to work with passengers. But in the end, our sole role is to make sure that we keep this airspace as safe as possible. The administrator is going to talk about all of the tools we're going to deploy. One of them, though, is going to be that there is going to be a 10% reduction in capacity at 40 of our locations. The administrator is going to tell you that this is data-based. This is not based on what airline travels, has more flights out of what location. This is about where is the pressure and how do we alleviate the pressure.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy at a news conference today in Washington, D.C. Federal government is now been shut down for 36 days. That's a new record, surpassing the old record of 35 days that happened in late 2018 into 19 during the first Trump administration. Today, President Donald Trump spoke about the government shutdown when he invited Senate Republicans to the White House for a breakfast.
So as you know, we are in the midst of a disastrous Democrat-created government shutdown, and it is Democrat-created, but I don't think they're getting really the blame that they should. That's now officially the longest shutdown in American history. The Democrat radicals in the Senate have shown zero interest in reopening the government, and I don't think they'll act so soon. A lot of people disagree. I've been saying for the last 30 days, we've had 4 or 5 different points. Yes, sir, they're going to get it right now. We should have it done in a day. I've heard that about 4 times. I heard it after Kings. You know, they said I was a king. and I heard it after Kings. I heard it after a couple of other moments in time. And I said, no, I don't believe so. And now I heard it's after the election. I don't believe so. I think they will. I think they're kamikaze pilots. I just got back from Japan. I talked about the kamikaze pilots. I think these guys are kamikaze. They'll take down the country if they have to. So I don't think so. Millions of Americans are going to be without SNAP benefits. And I will say about SNAP benefits, so when I was president, we had $7 billion worth, and now they have many times that, because these benefits were given to anybody that asked. And they're up to, I hear, just many times, $47 billion. So it wasn't the purpose of SNAP. That was for people that really had problems, down and out, people that really had problems. But during Biden, they gave it to anybody that wanted it. I think it's something you have to talk about because the numbers are incredible. But countless public servants are now not being paid, and the air traffic control system is under increasing strain. We must get the government back open soon, and really immediately. We have to get it up. We have the hottest economy we've ever had.
President Donald Trump at the White House this morning at a breakfast with Senate Republicans. He went on to again call for the Senate to get rid of the filibuster. That's the requirement of 60 votes, a supermajority, to pass most legislation, including a bill to reopen the government, which, given the current Senate breakdown of 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats, would require bipartisanship, which has not happened yet, to end the shutdown. Here again is the president.
We can't be extorted to give $1.5 trillion to people that came into the country illegally, many from prisons, many drug dealers. A lot of people came in from mental institutions. They want to give a lot of money to the people that came in illegally. We have to get them out. We can't. No country can sustain that. That's not like an attack on our country. In no country, these are not going to be productive people. These are going to be anti-productive people. And we can all have big hearts. I have a bigger heart than anybody, but we can't let that happen. It's time for Republicans to do what they have to do, and that's terminate the filibuster. It's the only way you can do it. And if you don't terminate the filibuster, you'll be in bad shape. We won't pass any legislation. There'll be no legislation passed for 3.25. We have 3.25 years, so that's a long time. But when they can't do an extension, and John, I think they've done an extension every single time they've ever been asked forever. This is the first time they haven't done an extension. Extensions are supposed to be easy, but if they won't do an extension, they won't do any bill, even a simple bill. And we should do our own bills. We should get out. We should do our own bills. We should open up. We should start tonight with the country's open. Congratulations. Then we should pass voter ID.
President Donald Trump at the White House with Senate Republicans. ABC News writing, returning from the White House Wednesday after President Donald Trump made yet another call for Senate Republicans to overturn the filibuster. Majority Leader John Thune reiterated his view that there are not the necessary votes among Senate Republicans to change the Senate rules. Thune was asked Wednesday if he believed that Trump could sway some of his reluctant members to support the filibuster. He said, I don't doubt that he could have some sway with members, but I know where the math is on this issue in the Senate, and it's just not happening. Reporting from ABC News. Most Senate Democrats have been voting against the bill the Republican majority has brought forth multiple times to temporarily fund the government and the shutdown. Democrats say it's because it does not include health care provisions that they demand. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, spoke on the Senate floor this morning about the shutdown and also Tuesday night's election results.
Last night was a great night for America and a 5-alarm fire for Donald Trump and Republicans. The Republicans' high-cost House is on fire, and they've only got themselves to blame. As loudly and clearly as they could have, the American people said last night, enough is enough. Enough with Donald Trump's tariffs, which are overwhelmingly being paid for by working people and small businesses. Enough with Republicans' relentless attack on health care, where people are seeing their premiums go up by thousands of dollars, even each month, and they may have to be without health care altogether. Last night was a sign that if Republicans continue with their failed policies, their majorities are at risk, including here in this Senate chamber. The election showed that Democratic control of the Senate is much closer than people and prognosticators realize. So let me say it again. Republicans' high-cost House is on fire, and they've only got themselves to blame. And by the way, that's not just my opinion. It's Donald Trump's opinion. Last night, he said that the shutdown is a negative factor for the Republicans. When addressing why he had lost, this is what Trump said. The shutdown was a big factor, negative for Republicans. And let me read what Trump said last night. He said, this is Donald Trump speaking, Trump wasn't on the ballot, and the shutdown were the two reasons Republicans lost elections tonight. That's what Trump said. Trump admits that the Republican shutdown is hurting him and his party. The president is right. Americans realize Republicans are responsible for this awful shutdown, now the longest officially in history. What a shameless milestone. Donald Trump has now presided over the longest and second longest shutdowns ever, and he only has himself to blame.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on the Senate floor. He and the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, also Democrat from New York, sent another letter to President Trump today that begins, "We write to demand a bipartisan meeting of legislative leaders to end the GOP shutdown of the federal government and decisively address the Republican health care crisis." The letter ends with, "Thank you for your attention to this matter," a phrase that the president often uses in his social media posts. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, held a news conference on the government shutdown on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building with other House Republicans. The speaker got into a back and forth with Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan, Democrat from Pennsylvania, who was standing with the reporters, and some of those reporters caught the exchange.
I'm asking you a question if you're ready to have a conversation with the other side. You represent all of us. You are the speaker for all of us, sir. You have an obligation not just to speak lies to the American people. You have an obligation to call the leadership of both parties and bring us together and solve this problem together, Mr.
Okay,
Speaker.
let's talk about it. I've been doing that. We did that before the shutdown began. We went to the White House. We went and sat in front of the Resolute desk. We brought Leader Jeffries and Leader Schumer in, and we had a discussion. The president said, please don't shut the government down, and we cause all this pain to the American people. This has never happened before. It's a clean, nonpartisan CR that every Democrat, including you, voted no on September 19th. You voted to shut down the government.
You are absolutely misrepresenting history, sir, and you know that you are, and you're dividing the American people unnecessarily. It's important. No, sir, I do not regret anything. It's important that we unify and that we work together as both parties for the American people. And right now, all you're doing is dividing us even further.
Thanks for your input.
I appreciate you too.
Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan, Democrat from Pennsylvania, in the audience with reporters outside the U.S. Capitol, back and forth with House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, who, along with other House Republicans, were holding a news conference on the government shutdown. The Hill writes a group of centrist Senate Democrats are sounding out Democratic colleagues on a potential deal to reopen the federal government this week or next week, but they're getting strong pushback that could scuttle a potential agreement, according to people familiar with the discussion. Such a deal would include a plan to pass regular appropriations bills and a promised vote on ending expiring health insurance subsidies. That was from The Hill. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Friday on C-SPAN's Ceasefire. At a moment of deep division in Washington, former Democratic National Committee Chair Donna Brazile and former Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel come together for a bipartisan dialogue on Tuesday's election results, potential impact on the 2026 midterms, and increasing partisanship. They join host Dasha Burns.
Ceasefire, bridging the divide in American politics.
Watch Ceasefire Friday at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and Pacific only on C-SPAN.
And if you miss an episode, you can find Ceasefire as a podcast at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. From CBS News, Democrats scored victories in the four major races of the night Tuesday night, the New York City mayoral race. the governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, and Prop 50, California's redistricting ballot measure. Exit polling showed voters went to the polls with worries about the economy on their minds, coupled with broader discontent with the state of the country right now. Reporting from CBS News, President Donald Trump reflected on election results as he opened his remarks this morning at the White House, a breakfast with Senate Republicans.
Last night it was not expected to be a victory. It was very Democrat-heavy, but I don't think it was good for Republicans. I don't think it was good. I'm not sure it was good for anybody. But we had an interesting evening, and we learned a lot. And we're going to talk about that, and I'll say a few remarks, and then after that I'll ask the press to leave. The press has been very, very nice to us the last couple of months. They were great to us in terms of the foreign visits with China, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia. And they were actually terrific. So I want to thank you for that. I'm sure you'll get back to your normal ways soon. But we did a great job over in China. And we've done a great job in turning off wars. We stopped 8 wars. And we have 1 to go, as you probably know, and that'll get stopped also. But we've done a great job. So it's really been an honor to do it. And I did it with many of the people in this room. Every one of you I know, and every one of you I like our leaders. I like everybody. But I thought we'd have a discussion after the press leaves about what last night represented and what we should do about it, and also about the shutdown and how that relates to last night. I think if you read the pollsters, the shutdown was a big factor, negative for the Republicans. And that was a big factor, and they say that I wasn't on the ballot was the biggest factor. But I don't know about that, but I was honored that they said that.
President Donald Trump this morning at the White House, a breakfast with Senate Republicans. The president focused today in speeches and posts on the anniversary of his election, writing on Truth Social. Happy anniversary. On this day, November 5th, 1 year ago, we had one of the greatest presidential victories in history. Such an honor to represent our country. Our economy is booming and costs are coming way down. Affordability is our goal. Love to the American people. Signed, President Donald J. Trump. And he said this today at the American Business Forum in Miami about his election 1 year ago, and also Tuesday night's election of Democrat Zohran Mamdani to be New York City mayor.
And I love Miami. I love to be with the people. Many of you are not from Miami, but that's okay too. And I'm thrilled to be back in magnificent Florida, Miami, Florida, with thousands of incredible business leaders and true American patriots. That's what you are. We're gathered today on the 1 year anniversary of the single most consequential election victory, they say. This is them. This isn't me. I'm a very modest person. I would never say this. The single most consequential election victory in American history. It's possible. I mean, it's possible. We've done a lot. On November 5th, 2024, the American people reclaimed our government. We restored our sovereignty. We lost a little bit of sovereignty last night in New York, but we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. We rescued our economy, regained our liberty, and together we saved our country.
President Trump in Miami at the American Business Forum. Later in the speech, he called New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, who self-identifies as a democratic socialist, a communist, and said the 2026 elections, the midterms, will be a choice between communism and common sense. Zohran Mamdani held a news conference today in New York City. He was asked what lessons President Trump can take away from Tuesday's elections.
I think the lesson for the president is that it's not enough to diagnose the crisis in working class Americans' lives. You have to deliver on addressing that crisis. This is a president who ran a campaign on the promise of cheaper groceries, and now, as was said by one of our co-chairs, has gone so far as to cut SNAP benefits for close to 2 million New Yorkers. Someone who is literally making it harder to afford those same groceries whose price he was decrying not that long ago. And what scares Republicans across the country is the fact that we will actually deliver on this agenda. And the contrast is something that they cannot bear to witness. And I try to keep my focus similar to that cover on the New Yorker where the world ends at New Jersey, and thinking about what this means for our city instead of for our nation. And I will tell you that for our city, what left me with such great hope last night were the stories from so many New Yorkers who had never voted before, who had lost hope in politics years ago, and to stand here before you having received over 1 million votes in an election that saw turnout the likes of which we haven't seen since 1969. It shows that politics, once again, is offering more than just a settling for the crumbs that are not able to meet the needs of so many families across the city. We are finally offering a vision that can meet the scale of the crisis in working class New Yorkers' lives.
New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, a Democrat, at a news conference today in New York. In Washington, D.C., U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, was asked about the election of Mamdani and other Democrats on Tuesday and what it means for the midterm elections in 2026, when voters will choose every U.S. House member and 1/3 of the Senate.
As we know from history, those of us who watch these things very closely and always do, that an off-year election is not indicative of what happens next. I mean, look at Virginia, for example. Glenn Youngkin won his race for governor, and then the Democrats, the opposing party, did very well in the upcoming midterm election. These off-year elections are about different things, different dynamics. In Northern Virginia, there are a lot of federal employees. They're probably pretty upset. And they should blame the Democrats for that, because as we noted today, 15 different times Republicans in Congress, Senate and House, voted to open the government, and the Democrats, like our colleague who just tried to interrupt us here, voted to close it down. So it's very clear who's responsible for this, and I think that when we go into next year in the midterms, we're very bullish about the outcome. We have an extraordinary record to run on. You mentioned, Leader Scalise mentioned sort of what we call the split screen here, and I'll remind you all again, under President Trump and Republicans, we have had an extraordinary run. The first 9 months of this, 9 months, the 10th month has been shut down because of the Democrats. The first 9 months of this Congress and this administration, arguably the most productive of all time. We cut taxes, cut regulations, cut waste, fraud, and abuse in government. We solved the border crisis, which was the #1 issue on the ballot last fall. We're solving the crime crisis around the country. We got American energy dominance revved and going again. We have new trade agreements that are more favorable to Americans, which will ultimately bring down costs. We have put real reforms into the Medicaid program to strengthen it, because we've got people who are ineligible recipients, like illegal aliens and young able-bodied men without dependents, off the program, so that the disabled, the elderly, and young pregnant women can have the resources they need. The president is literally solving wars around the globe. I think we're up to 9. All of that is on one side of the screen. What are the Democrats on the other side of the screen? A government shutdown. What did they accomplish in 9 months? Interruptions. They've assaulted ICE officers. They have spurred on political violence. And they closed down the government, which is their most basic duty and responsibility. I think the American people are smart. I think they will understand this. And I think the midterm is going to be a great one for us. We had a demographic shift in 2024. We have a very favorable election map on the Republican side, and it will be even more favorable once all the redistricting stuff is settled out. We have Democrats who are flailing. They have no leader. Their national leader now, as we've noted, is Mamdani. He's a communist. Good luck with that.
U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, news conference today on the steps of the Capitol building with other House Republicans. Virginia Scope writing that Governor Glenn Youngkin struck a conciliatory tone the morning after Republicans suffered losses across the board Tuesday night. Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger defeated her Republican opponent, Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears, by more than 15 points, and House Democrats flipped 13 seats. Youngkin said during a press conference at the Patrick Henry Building in Richmond, "I first want to begin with my congratulations for Governor-elect Spanberger, and she is stepping into what I believe is an incredibly important role." And Youngkin vowed to work with Spanberger to ease the transition into a new administration in January. That was from Virginia Scope. Here is more from Governor Youngkin's news conference on why he thinks Republicans lost.
Let me just begin with, there are going to be pundit after pundit after pundit who will unpick the results in Virginia, in New Jersey, in New York, and have lots of theories. I, as a governor, will today do exactly what I knew I would be doing today, regardless of the outcome, and that is preparing to finish strong and hand the next governor the best possible Virginia that I can hand her. It was going to be a her one way or the other. And therefore, that's what we're focused on. I do think that the government shutdown is a big challenge. It is a big, big challenge. I have been vocal about it. I think that we have 330,000 federal workers in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And to have this shutdown extending as the longest shutdown ever has been extraordinary for so many Virginians. People are going without paychecks. They're worried about mortgages and rents. They're worried about how they're going to feed their families. The challenge of this government shutdown is real. And I am incredibly understanding of that challenge for all Virginians. And I think it caused quite a turnout yesterday. With that said, that's why we have been so focused on making sure that, particularly when it comes to providing food assistance to the most vulnerable Virginians, we're just not going to let that get interrupted. And I call on our senators to vote to open the government and then sort this thing out. But this has been an incredibly disruptive time for Virginians to see the government now shut for over a month, to see our military worry about whether they're going to get paid, our air traffic controllers and TSA folks at the airports not getting paid. But again, we have 330,000 government workers in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I can't imagine how disruptive this has been for their families. And so I do believe that had a major impact on yesterday.
Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, at a news conference today in Richmond, Virginia. Virginia's Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, a Democrat, was interviewed on NPR this morning.
As you think about taking office in January, how you see your future relationship with the president?
Well, certainly during my time in Congress during his first presidency, my approach was always, if there is something that I can work on for Virginia, I will look to build out that coalition. And certainly I will look to work with a president that I may disagree with on, substantially. And right at this moment, coming in now as governor-elect and governor in the new year, my approach will be to make sure that I'm pushing for what we need here on the ground. And right now that will be pushing back against a variety of the bad policies that are coming out of this White House. Again, our cargo coming into our port is down nearly 9% year over year. And that's impacting certainly people down the line who would be bringing in those goods. But I've heard directly from truck drivers and port workers about the impact. Our economy is set to have zero growth next year. We had 7 months of rising unemployment, principally because of DOGE. And we had been the number one state for business, and we lost that. And CNBC, with that rating, said it was because of DOGE. So, there are so many places where, when it comes to the choices of this president, his choices are at odds with the needs of Virginians. And so I will continue to make that clear and continue to push back on bad policies. But certainly any place I can find common ground, celebrate what it is that we're trying to do in Virginia. I look forward to doing that, and hopefully, we'll see a lessening of some of these attacks on our state into the future. At least that's what I'm going to work to achieve.
Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, a Democrat, this morning on National Public Radio. The Bergen record in New Jersey writes, the morning after her decisive election victory, Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill met with Governor Phil Murphy at the State House in Trenton. Sherrill, a fourth-term Congress member, beat her Republican opponent, Jack Ciattarelli, Tuesday and became the second woman and the first for the Democratic Party to secure the governorship. Murphy made it clear that he is thrilled for Sherrill and her running mate Dale Caldwell on their huge historic victory. That was from the Bergen record. Mikey Sherrill defeated Jack Ciattarelli 56% to 43%, and she spoke at a news conference today in Trenton.
Governor, can you just describe what you envision for your first 100 days?
Yes, well, I'm going to declare a state of emergency on day one and freeze utility costs. And then really we'll get right to work on the kids' online safety agenda, where we are going to take on those algorithms as well as stand up a committee of excellence so we can get information, because right now the tech companies have most of the information. Join the tariff lawsuit very quickly that other states are engaged in to push back on the tariff program that Trump is running that's really harming our economy here, and then get to work on the state budget as well, because that's coming up very quickly.
You have mentioned throughout your campaign that you're opposing Trump in various ways on various issues. Now that you are the governor-elect of New Jersey for 4 years, governor, he's going to be president for 3 years. Have you reached out to him Has he reached out to you? Do you plan to have some kind of communication with him? As you know, Governor Murphy has created a relationship where he can work with this guy, even though he opposes a lot of what he's doing.
We haven't spoken yet, but certainly I'm going to be working very hard to get resources, federal resources, back into New Jersey to discuss and take on the Gateway Tunnel funding right away, because that's such a key issue and such a key economic driver here.
New Jersey Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill, Democrat, a news conference today in the capital city, Trenton, in New Jersey. Spectrum News writing that California Republicans filed a federal lawsuit Wednesday to block a new U.S. House map that California voters decisively approved at the ballot. Proposition 50, backed by Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, is designed to help Democrats flip as many as 5 congressional House seats in the midterm elections next year. The lawsuit claims the map makers illegally used race as a factor to favor Hispanic voters and asked the court to block the new boundaries ahead of the 2026 elections. That was from Spectrum News. Attorney Mark Moiser spoke at a news conference in Sacramento.
California has probably the most diverse statewide elected officials. You look at our congressional delegation, look at the Assembly, look at the Senate. Because of our diversity of population, we have a diversity of politicians. There is no white majority in California. There is no white plurality in California. The leading demographic is the Hispanic community. And we expect, the evidence will show, that the voting patterns in California will show that Californians vote on party lines, not based upon the color of your skin. We believe that the Supreme Court Jingles test cannot be satisfied by the state. As such, under the 14th and 15th Amendment, the maps drawn by Prop 50 will be considered unconstitutional, and we are asking a federal 3-judge panel to find Prop 50 maps unconstitutional and go back to the commission maps.
Attorney Mark Moiser at a news conference today in Sacramento, California. He's part of the Dillon Law Group, which is based in California and started by Harmeet Dillon, who is now an Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice. California state lawmakers also at this news conference and part of the lawsuit. Prop 50 was approved by California voters on Tuesday, 64 to 35%. Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, celebrated Tuesday night in Sacramento.
Let me underscore, it's been a good evening for everybody, not just the Democratic Party. But what a night for the Democratic Party. A party that is in its ascendancy, a party that's on its toes, no longer on its heels, from coast to coast, sea to shining sea. But it was not just a victory tonight for the Democratic Party, it was a victory for the United States of America, for the people of this country and the principles that our founding fathers lived and died for. And so we're proud. We're proud here in California to be part of this narrative this evening. We're proud of the work that the people of the state of California did tonight to send a powerful message to an historic president. Donald Trump is an historic president. He is the most historically unpopular president in modern history. In every critical category, Donald Trump is underwater. He promised to make us healthier. He promised to make us wealthier. We're sicker and poorer. And he fundamentally understands that. Why else would he call Greg Abbott saying he's entitled to 5 seats? Why else is he trying to rig the midterm elections before one single vote is even cast? He understands his position at this moment in the United States of America. One thing he never counted on, though, was the state of California. Instead of agonizing over the state of our nation, we organized in an unprecedented way in a 90-day sprint. People from all over the United States of America contributed their voices and their support for this initiative. We stood tall and we stood firm in response to Donald Trump's recklessness. And tonight, after poking the bear, this bear roared with an unprecedented turnout in a special election with an extraordinary result.
California Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, Tuesday night in Sacramento on the success of the Prop 50 congressional redistricting ballot initiative. Another note about another election from the Hill, special election to fill former Congressman Sylvester Turner, Democrat from Texas's seat, will head to an all-Democratic runoff, according to a Decision Desk HQ projection. Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee and former Houston City Council member Amanda Edwards advanced as the top two vote-getters on a night no candidate received an outright majority. 16 candidates ran to fill the remainder of Turner's term in the House after he died in March. That was from The Hill. From NPR, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth briefed a group of top congressional members behind closed doors on Wednesday following President Trump's order for a wave of unprecedented U.S. military strikes against alleged drug boats that are raising the specter of a new war. Legal analysts have broadly described the strikes as illegal under both U.S. and international law, in part because they may not have been authorized by Congress. That was from NPR. Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, the Intelligence Committee vice chair, spoke to reporters after the closed-door briefing.
All drug traffickers are bad guys, and the threat they pose to America in terms of undermining Americans' health is serious. And also in terms of Venezuela, Maduro is a bad government, and I frankly think the Biden administration didn't go far enough after the Venezuelan people voted overwhelmingly to get rid of Maduro. And remember, our government still doesn't recognize the Maduro government. But the notion on the kinetic strikes without actually interdicting and demonstrating to the American public that these are carrying drugs and they're full of bad guys, I think is a huge mistake, and I think it undermines the confidence in the administration's actions. And the final comment I'll make is just that nothing in the legal opinion even mentions Venezuela, and I'll leave it at that.
After what you've seen today in there, are you confident that the administration has the legal authority to be doing what it's doing?
I think there is an argument being made that has been used in other examples going against other non-governmental entities. You know, there is a question, even if at some point there was authority, how long does this last? I mean, we're now talking about something that has gone on months. We oftentimes think of the president taking action in response to a specific idea, and usually that is of short duration. And I'm looking forward to the debate. I'm looking forward to the fact of all of my colleagues weighing in who frankly got probably more expertise on the legalities of this. But the idea that this would be for an indeterminate period of time, again, without showing the world or the American public that the boats being destroyed are carrying drugs and that these are all bad guys, is an open question.
Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, Intelligence Committee vice chair, speaking to reporters outside the closed-door briefing with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Again, from the NPR article, since the strikes began in September, at least 66 have been killed in 16 strikes in the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean, according to the administration. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word. We'll send you the stories making headlines in Washington. You can subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.